Okay, Trig, we are in R6 now. You're going to have to, I forgot to look up the homework assignment for this before I started recording, but you're going to have to look at the sheet that I gave you to get this homework assignment. Or maybe Averly has it written up on the board. I'm not really sure yet. But yeah, get this homework assignment from the page that I gave you at the beginning, R6, and then you'll have to look, depending on where we get. I'll tell you where to look for how many problems that you can get done. So we're at the start of R6, and we're starting to deal with imaginary numbers, okay? So the very most important thing to remember is this bullet point of like what an imaginary number stands for. And most of you should know this, I think, that imaginary number is the square root of a -1. So like, let's say I have the square root of -4 that I'm doing, right? We know that the square root of 4 is 2, right? But the square root of a -1. So this is how I would like break it down, right? Square root of 4 times the square root of -1 will give me the square root of -4. The square root of a -1 is an I, right? So like the answer to this would be 2I. Because you basically, the square root of a negative is an imaginary number. You cannot take the square root of a negative. Or you can't take the fourth root or the 6th root or the 8th root or the 10th root of a negative number, because you cannot multiply something by itself an even number of times and get a negative. You can an odd number, right? So if I have the cubic root or the 5th root or the 7th root, I can have a negative, but not an even power. Okay, now, if let's hone in on this bullet point right here. If I is equal to the square root of -1, and let's say I square both sides, right? Now I have I squared is equal to this junk, and a square root and a square cancel each other off. So that means I squared is equal to just -1. Okay, so if I have higher powers of I know that I squared is -1. Okay, so yes, like they had here, if you have a positive number, whatever, like if B was like -4, this would be I times the square root of 4, or in this case 2I. Okay, if this is the square root of, let's say, the square root of -7, right? This would just be I times the square root of 7, because that negative is going to pop out as an I, okay? All right, so let's go down here. Rewrite each expression in terms of I. I know that the square root of 25 is 5, but I know the square root of a negative has to be an imaginary number, so 5I, okay? I don't know if it helps you or if it confuses you more to do the whole, like, I feel like this kind of confuses you sometimes. You look at me and you're like, what does that mean? Right? 25 times a -1 gives me -25, but the square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of -1 is I, right? So if you want to look at the whole breakdown of it, that is fine, okay? All right, this is where we kind of have some weird things going on. So I have the square root of 12I, because I can't take the square root of 12, but what I can do is I can break them down into 4 and 3, right? So I have the square root of 4 and the square root of 3, and the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 3 stays. And then I have to put the I in there. I usually put the I right here. 2I square roots of 3. Or you could do 2 square roots of 3I. It doesn't matter where you put it at. I don't know. I've seen both written. So whichever one makes you happier. I don't know. Now that I'm looking at both, I'm like, oh, I think this one looks more familiar. I don't know. Each book uses a different thing. So whichever one makes you happier, all right? The square root of 13 and negative, this will be the square root of 13I, or, see, they write it with the I in front. They write it as I, the square root of 13, okay? Now, the square root of 13 is not like 12. It will not break down into anything because 13 is a prime number, so it will literally just be I square roots of 13, and you're done, okay? Okay, these are exciting. You're not going to be real excited about this, but these are exciting. I to the 48th power, and I to the 23rd power, and I to the 50th power. And then we'll talk about this negatives doing negative 19th power. But let me do this real quick. Let me have you do 4 things going on here. So let's say we make this example off to the side before we do example 2, okay? Let's say we have I to the 4th, I to the 5th, I to the 6th, and I to the 7th, okay? I want you to do that real quick for me, okay? Because there are only, when you have problems like this, there are only 4 different solutions that you're going to get. Just 4, that's it, okay? and it's going to be one of these four. Okay, so I to the fourth power. Let's say we're breaking him down, right? Okay, I don't know what I to the fourth power is, but I know what I squared is, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create I to the fourth power, and all that's going to do is I squared, right? Like 2 times 2 will give me 4, right? So I write everything in terms of I squared, okay? Now, I know that I squared is a -1, and if I take a -1 and I square it, that's going to be a +1. So I to the fourth power becomes +1. No i's left, like he's done. All right, now let's say we have I to the fifth power. I don't know what I to the fifth power it is, but I know what I squared is, and I know that if I square that, I have 4 of them, but then I need one more I, right? So this becomes I to the fourth power plus another I will give me I to the fifth, right? That's how that works, okay? So I know that this is a -1, and I know that a -1 squared is a +1 times I is just +1I, right? So I to the fifth reduced to be I, okay? I to the sixth power, I don't know what I to the sixth power is, but I know what I squared is, and I know that if I take that to the third power, I will get 6, because 2 times 3 gives me 6, okay? And I squared is -1, and if I take -1 times itself 3 times, -1, -1, -1, that gives me a -1. So I to the sixth power becomes -1. Okay, you can kind of maybe figure out what this last one's going to be, right? We have 1, I, -1, -I, probably, right? I don't know what I to the seventh power is, but I know what I squared is. And I know that if I take that to the third power, that will give me 6 of them. But then I need one more to make 7, right? Okay, I squared is a -1, and -1 times itself 3 times is -1 times another I is -1I, or just -I, just like that. Okay? So this is the only 4 options that you will have happen when you're reducing i's. And I guess we'll talk about what happens when you have a negative here. Okay, that's going to change them just a little bit. But when you're simplifying i's to like multiple huge high powers, it's either going to be 1, I, -1, or -I. Okay, now you might also have this one figured out. If it is an exponent that's divisible by 4, here's how you cheat, right? If it's an exponent that's divisible by 4, automatically it's going to be 1, okay? If it's even, but not divisible by 4, like 6, it's going to be a -1. You don't have any i's hanging off, but because it's an even number, but it's not divisible by 4, so you are going to have a -1, okay? If it's 1 more than divisible by 4, right? It's 1 more than a number divisible by 4, like 5, right? 5 is 1 more than a number divisible by 4. He's going to be +I. And if he is 1 less than divisible by 4, right? Like 8 would be divisible by 4. He's 1 less than a number divisible by 4. He's going to be -I, right? Because less than means minus, and more than means plus, +I, right? So that's how you can kind of remember those, okay? So that's how you cheat. These are how you cheat, right? If you know the rule. If not, we'll just do each one, right? So I to the 48th power. I don't know what I to the 48th power is, but I know what I squared is, and I know if you take that times itself 24 times, right? 2 times 24 will give me 48. I don't have to have an extra I hanging off, right? So this is -1 times itself 24 times. If I take a negative times itself an even number of times, it's going to give me a +1, right? Let's go back to the rules over here. 48 is a number divisible by 4, so it has +1 is what he's going to end up being. Okay, let's go to B. B is 23, so we're going to have I in our answer, right? Because 23 is an odd number. Okay. All right. I squared. I can do that to, let's see, the 11th power. That will give me 22, but then I need one more, right, to make 23. I squared is -1. -1 times itself 11 times is going to stay a negative times I, so this will be -I. Okay, now let's look back at our cheater rules. 23 is 1 less than a number divisible by 4, right? 24 is divisible by 4. It's 1 less than, so it's going to be -1. Or, no, excuse me, -I. Okay, I to the 50th, I know he's going to either be 1 or negative 1. Okay? If he's divisible by 4, he's going to be 1. If he's not divisible by 4, he's going to be negative 1. Let's see what he ends up being. I squared to the 25th power will give me 50, right? This is negative 1. I don't know if you can hear me. I hope you can. Negative 1 to the 25th power times itself 25 times will stay a negative 1. So he is not divisible by 4, right? 50 doesn't divide 4 evenly. He will stay a negative 1. Okay, now D. What the heck is that doing? Right? What about negative 19? Okay, this, don't let this confuse you. This will just be 1 over I to the 19th power, right? That's what the negative does. So let's just figure out what I to the 19th power is, and then just put it underneath a 1, right? So I to the 19th, I know that I squared to the, I gotta think, 2 times 9 gives me 18, but then I need 1 more, right, to make 19. Okay, and I squared is negative 1. Negative 1 times itself 9 times is still negative 1. Times I, this is going to be negative I. Okay, so what I have going on here is 1 over negative I. Okay, now they will say, that that's technically not proper. Yeah, if you get it to 1 over negative I, I'll probably count it right, but here's the deal. They say that having an I in the bottom is kind of like having a square root in the bottom. We don't want square roots in the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, let's multiply by negative I over negative I, okay, because I want to get this out of the bottom, right? So like when we have like 2 over the square root of 3, we end up multiplying by the square root of 3, right? Over the square root of 3 to get him gone, right? It's kind of like doing the same thing. You multiply by itself, right? So on the top, I have negative I, right? 1 times negative I is negative I. On the bottom, I have negative times a negative, which is a positive, and I times I is I squared. But we know that I squared is negative 1, right? So this is negative I over negative 1, which is just positive I. So this guy is the same thing as positive I. Weird. That was a mess. If you need to go back and watch that in slow-mo, you can. Okay. But if you get to this point, I will probably count it right. This guy is technically the proper form of doing that. Whew, what a mess. All right, let's do a couple more, and then we will be done. Yeah, we'll maybe do up through example 5. Let's see how fast these go. All right. Perform the indicated operations and write the answer in A plus BI form. This is standard form for a complex number is what these are called. Okay, complex numbers have a real part and they have an imaginary part. Okay, so it's not just something I, it's like 3 plus 4i or negative 2 minus 7i, whatever. It has a real part and an imaginary part. Okay, all right, this one is just adding and subtracting. So all I'm doing is I'm going to drop the parentheses. Negative 2 minus 4i. This plus is just leaving this plus 5 plus 2i. But if it's a negative, I've got to distribute. Now, I always say this. Technically, you're distributing the plus sign through also. But plus times 5 leaves it plus 5. Plus times positive 2i leaves it as a 2i, right? So you do distribute the negative, but it doesn't need to be like whatever. Anyway, negative 3 plus 6i, all that sorts of stuff. Now I'm going to do the real part. So negative 2 plus 5 minus 3. That cancels, doesn't it? What? That all cancels. He's gone. So now I really will only have an I part. Negative 4 plus 2 plus 6 is going to be, I think, 4i. So final answer, 4i. That's it. Okay. So like our A part was 0. This is like 0 plus 4i. So we can just leave it as 4i. Nice. All right. Now we are multiplying. Okay. And when we're multiplying, we have a binomial and a binomial. So just like when there's x's, you just multiply stuff through. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. Negative 2 times 3i is plus 6i. This guy will be plus 24i. And this is the hard part. positive 6i times negative 3i is negative 18i squared. Okay? All right. Before we start combining like terms, we're going to fix our I squared. I know that I squared is just negative 1, so I'm going to replace that there. And negative 18 times negative 1 is just going to be positive 18. And now I'm going to combine my like terms. So I have negative 8, positive 18, that makes 10, and 6i and 24i, that makes plus 30i. Okay? So anytime you have an I squared on there, just make that a negative 1. Really what it's going to do is just going to flip the sign of what's in front of it, right? We're going to see that again here in just a second. So a couple more. Let's do B first. Actually, no, what? No, let's do this one. We'll do this one first. So when you're squaring something, you cannot just distribute this through because there's a plus sign there. He is trapped. So what you have to do is to square something means to take it times itself. So 3 plus 4i times 3 plus 4i. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just FOIL. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4i is 12i. 4i times 3 is another 12i. And 4i times 4i is 16i squared. All right, we know that I squared is negative 1, so that's just going to make this negative 16 instead of a positive 16. And now I can combine. 9 and negative 16 is negative, I'm blanking here, negative 7, there we go. And 12i and 12i becomes 24i. And there we go. Okay, so you're just foiling. B, if I'm going too fast, just pause. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times negative 2i is negative 10i. 2i times 5 is plus 10i. And 2i times negative 2i is negative 4i squared. Okay. We know that I squared is negative 1, and that's going to make this a positive 4, right? Instead of a negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. Okay, this one's kind of fancy because our middle two pieces canceled out. Why did they do that? So we just have 29 as the answer, right? Why did our middle two pieces cancel out? Look at these two. Those two things are conjugates, right? We know that. So if we knew that beforehand, if we could recognize that beforehand, we just know to skip that middle two steps because we know that they're going to cancel. Okay, I've talked long enough. Let's have you stop there. You should be able to get like almost, I don't know, look in your book and find where it says learn, solve quadratic equations over a set of complex numbers. You should be almost to get almost to that one. Maybe like one before it is where you stop. So anytime you have like these eyes on top of each other, we haven't done that yet. So just skip those, okay? So you should be able to get a decent way through the homework assignment, start working on those problems, and have a great long weekend. Goodbye.